In today's episode, Sacha Stone, former rock musician and current filmmaker and activist for natural justice, talks to us about 2020 and beyond. Join us as Sacha shares with us his insights into what it means to be consciousness in action, understanding the significance of 2020, and where we are collectively moving towards as a human species. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. In today's episode, we are talking to Sacha Stone. And I'm really excited to talk with Sacha because Sacha has such an eclectic background. He was a former rock musician, and then now he's an activist and a filmmaker and a writer and a public speaker. And I mean, the guy is putting content out all the time, and he is incredibly passionate about natural justice and human rights. And this has been a big part of his life for a long time. He's created a number of different platforms that ultimately have all just been an extension of his passion for natural justice and human rights. And these include things like Humanitad and the New Earth Project and the International Tribunal for Natural Justice, and most recently, the World Health Sovereignty Summit, which works with many of the world's leading advocates in the sectors of health, including Robert Kennedy Jr., Del Bigtree, Edward Griffin, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, Dr. David Martin, and a number of others. And he's basically, all of this revolves around his passion for human rights and for natural justice. And Sacha Stone's an incredibly well-spoken and has such an eclectic background and very much experience in these different areas. Even with the International Tribunal for Natural Justice, that was actually one of the first things that my wife and I came across earlier on in 2020. I think it was probably in March that we came across an episode of the International Tribunal for Natural Justice talking about a whole lot of topics that I wasn't even aware of, including the extent of things like human trafficking and child sex abuse. And I had no idea to the degree. I mean, I had heard parts of that, but as I started to actually try and understand more of what was going on, the more you try to understand, the more information you start to come across. You can't close your eyes to certain things after a certain point. And if some of these things are going on, then I feel like we all have a responsibility to act in whichever way we can to try and make these things stop. I mean, Sacha talks in the episode, he talks about there's about 800,000 kids in North America that just go missing every year, like gone, not just truants that are disappeared, but they have gone completely. And some of these things we need to find answers to some of these things. So Sacha goes through a lot of different information. Sacha is an activist, and he's very well-spoken, and he comes from a very authentic place of his own personal truth. And some of that stuff may shake people up a little bit or rock them a little bit or challenge their ideas and their beliefs around what they believe to be true. But I think this is part of the reason why we're creating this series, is to bring a lot of different pieces. And some of these are really even hard to hear sometimes and hard to listen to because they do challenge our own beliefs. But I think part of this is to ask more questions. That's what all of this is about. Listen to this information, see where it sits with you, look into it in more detail. There's lots of different information available all over the place. So move outside of just mainstream media and start to investigate in different ways. But Sacha brings a lot of different information to the table today. So I hope you guys enjoy the episode. And then we also do live episodes with all of the guests as we go along. So within the next week, we will be doing another live. Now, I am recording this prior to the event that is going to be released, but we will have information coming up for his live event. So what you can do is when you're watching the episode, if you have any specific questions, write them down in the comment section so that we can compile them. And then during the live interview, we will ask those specific questions first, and then any questions that come up in the live feed, we will also ask those questions as well. So make sure that you tune in for that and leave as many questions as you have, and we'll ask them directly to Sacha and see what he has to say. I'd also like to thank the sponsor for this series, which is HMF Harmonized. HMF Harmonized is a really amazing company that has some pretty powerful technology to mitigate EMF exposure that we get from our cell phones, our computers, our routers, our tablets. And to learn more about EMF Harmonized, just go to the website, Inspire Health Podcast, or click the link that's in the show notes or in the YouTube video notes. Go to EMF Harmonized, get 10% off all powerful EMF and 5G protection technology. Click the link. When you get whatever you get, whatever you decide to purchase, you will automatically have 10% off when you go to actually purchase it. You'll see the little code that will take 10% off of it. And they've got some great videos on here too to watch. This is a really good one that looks at the red blood cells through a dark field microscopy. And what you will see when you watch the video is you'll see how the cells clump together when they get exposed to EMF radiation. And that when you start to add the discs to the cell phones, then all of a sudden the cells start to stop clumping and they start to break up a little bit. And you can even see this from a distance. So when you go here, just check on the video. It'll run you through everything. And then you can start to go through and you'll see what normal exposure to red blood cells looks like. You'll start to see what happens, the clumping that takes place. When you get into the phone, you'll see where the clumping takes place. Like, look at all that clumping that's going on. And then you'll notice that the clumping starts to break up more as they actually start to put on the discs, and you start to see less and less of the clumping. And so when red blood cells start to clump, that causes lots of troubles. It also changes the oxygenation that we have access to in the body. So in my mind, protection against EMF, mitigating technology that is going to prevent the damaging effects of EMF is essential. And right now, especially with the rollout of things like 5G that's taken place in different places, it's really important to just decrease any of the negative effects. And there's simple technology that works really well that can do that. And this has been well studied. And you'll see this is what it looks like. They literally are also little discs. So they stick right onto your tablet or onto your computer. And the ones that I've used before were quite clunky and then they don't fit in the case properly. What I love about these ones too is they just stick them on, they work, and you can put them back in their case. So I might have a case like this, right, where it goes in the cell phone. Even on this case, this sticks underneath here, it still fits everything. So it works out great. And then you can still use your technology and not be worried about the side effects to it. All right, everybody. So check that out. Leave me a comment if you have any questions in the show notes. Make sure you post questions for Sasha and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Inspire Health Podcast. Your life is about to get a whole lot better. Have you ever felt like you tried everything and yet still couldn't find the answers or the solutions that you were seeking? Whether you're dealing with chronic illness, physical or emotional pain, I want you to know that your body is the most sophisticated machine on planet Earth. Your body holds unfathomable wisdom. Trust in it and learn from it. Know that there are answers and there are solutions to your specific health challenges. And we will be uncovering all of them here on the Inspire Health Podcast. I'm so excited to be a part of your healing journey. Your transformation starts now. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health Podcast and to our 5th episode in our series on science, mysticism, and beyond, humanity's next phase of evolution. Today, we're super excited to have with us Sacha Stone. Sacha is a former rock musician and artist who grew up in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe throughout the War for Independence. He established Humanitad in 1999. He has worked across both the NGO and the IGO sectors as an outspoken advocate of human rights and natural justice. He has instigated peace initiatives and education programs lobbied against human rights abuses in different parts of the globe, and he continues to prosecute for the protection of breakthrough innovators, scientists, and doctors. Sacha founded the New Earth Project, promulgating blueprints for sustainable, sovereign, and self-determining communities, headquartered out of the world-renowned Akash New Earth Haven in Bali. Sacha is also founder of the ITNJ, International Tribunal for Natural Justice. This new planetary court is committed to the dispensation of natural justice. The ITNJ launched the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into Human Trafficking and Child Sex Abuse at Westminster Central Hall in London in spring 2018. The commission continues to hear witness testimonies from survivors and expert witnesses from around the globe via online virtual court seatings. The Judicial Commission of Inquiry into Weaponization of the Biosphere launched in 2019, and in 2020, the court launched an inquiry into Corona COVID, still underway as of 2020. Sacha is founder of the World Health Sovereignty Summit with many of the world's leading advocates in the sector, and Sacha is an activist, public speaker, publisher, writer, and filmmaker. Sacha, a real pleasure to have you on the show today.
Very good to be with you, Dr. Jason. Thank you.
Thank you. And you can call me Jason, that's totally fine. So, Sasha, for people that aren't aware of you as much at this point in time, because our audience is going to be a wide group of people, can you tell us a little bit about your journey? I mean, you've basically committed your entire life to natural justice and truth seeking. I mean, what brought you on that path?
Well, the elevator answer is growing up in a war in sub-Saharan Africa, which I've always maintained is the best possible education for irreverence and for really moving into life with a burning curiosity, like who's behind this kind of shit? How do we ever get to this? You know, guns and tanks and planes and, you know, destructivity. As a child, especially being in a place as exquisite as where I grew up, which many early explorers said was without any doubt the most beautiful country on the face of the earth, which was known as Rhodesia at the time, became Zimbabwe, of course, and is now the most destroyed economy in the world, absolutely destitute country. But it was just playing out on the bitch end of the Cold War stick and being the utility of the same old powers that were playing out their chess game in Africa. So I grew up in that uniquely and insidiously engineered dystopia. And that was a great, gave me a great grounding for, as I said, irreverence, which is the key thing for me, because the only thing now I've learned in my middle age is that our irreverence really becomes the sword that we can wield if we are truly taking on the serpent and wanting to inquire truthfully as to the nature of real reality. So to learn to disentangle one's adherence or one's kind of thrall to power, to the myth of power, whether it's a religious power or whether it's a power of, you know, Hollywood and the images that we're met with on the screen, or government essentially, and to disentangle, disengage, and disidentify oneself from all of that bullshit, because it is systemic bullshit. So the irreverence is the key piece. My background is a war in sub-Saharan Africa, and I've been fortunately irreverent enough in my life to be able to walk in a straight line and continue to ask the same questions tens of thousands of times until I'm satisfied that no answer is coming from out there. And at a given point, the alchemization of that is to move into a different form of inquiry, which is to ask oneself, what am I doing about it?
Mm-hmm.
How do I alchemize the status quo into something different? And now my whole hoo-ha is about consciousness in action / sovereignty, which is what I call actualized consciousness.
Yeah, I love it. And you say a really important point. You know, my wife grew up in the war in Iran. And so she's Persian, and they moved out here when she was 6 or 7. And so, you know, I feel like in a lot of ways, particularly North Americans, because we haven't lived in certain circumstances, you don't have the taste for some of the stuff in the same way that you do when you have these other experiences. I know when all of this stuff started up in 2020, my wife was just buzzing. Like she just knew with every fiber of her being, something felt really off because she'd had experiences prior where stuff felt like it didn't resonate, you know, where you were being lied to, or there was something going on that didn't feel right. And I feel like, and she attributes a lot of that to where she grew up and the experiences that she had earlier. And when I've talked to other people that have been in some of those same sort of experiences, it's almost not surprising to even question certain things because they've had experiences before where they have had to question, they've seen it firsthand. So I feel like that gives people a real advantage to being able to discern sometimes what and almost trust more, like you were even saying, a different level of inquiry. I feel like this is really paramount right now because I would say most times, and this we can come into this a little bit more, but it seems to me that one of the questions I'm posing to everybody is around how does one actually discern truth from falsehood? I feel like this is a really important question that we all need to kind of ask ourselves. And I'm looking at what everybody's input is around that to create some sort of a field to allow people to start to discern that more adequately for themselves. Because I feel like, at least in my world that I've seen, it seems that how we try to discern truth from falsehood is using the brain as much as we can. We look for certain levels of proof. I mean, even in school, it's like we are taught from a naturopathic perspective, there was a major shift in evidence-based medicine. This was a big push. And I understand the reason for that. But the problem that you kind of realize over the time is that most evidence-based medicine has its own agenda. It has its own biases. And if we're only using the intellect, logic, and reason to try to make sense of things, I feel like we can very easily be taken and led down the garden path into something very different. And what's coming up, at least for myself, has been this inquiry more of constantly asking myself, getting into a different place where I start to first try and get a very strong intuitive sense of things, and then start to look at the other pieces. It's like logic and reason that's guided by gut instinct and heart wisdom, in my mind, is what we're moving more and more to, because otherwise we are not really knowing our own truth. I feel like we're just sort of believing or accepting somebody else's truth. What's your take on that around the concept of discerning truth from falsehood?
Well, there was a lot of that you said, so I'm not quite sure of the discrete question, but what I do know is that all of those methodologies and systems of learning, of inquiring, and of intellectual orientation and intellectual evolution, as well as cultural and spiritual evolution, have led us as a species to a place called Capitol Hill, Washington District of Columbia, where a clutch of venal miscreants on both sides of the partisan aisle are invested at the soul level in only the treachery of deception and of fraud, of malfeasance, and of tyranny, of upholding tyranny against the living souls. That much I do know. That is the great acme, or the great zenith of our achievement in the normal pursuit of inquiry. Because it's Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., the franchise of the Anglo-American Corporation, which is a franchise of the British Crown, and the St. George's Square of Londinium, the City of London, the financial center of the world, which itself was a franchise of the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican complex, which itself was a franchise of the Caesars of Rome. Okay? So blood cult, sacrifice of innocence, the harvest of humanity, and the decimation of all that is judicious and righteous in the world, issues from 2,000 odd years ago, and moves its way, snakes its way through what we call history, ends up in the year 2021 in Capitol Hill, when we're as clever as you could possibly imagine. We purportedly sent people to the moon and back. We do quantum computation. I mean, we do, virtual surgery through the ethers. We are able to do the most extraordinary things. And yet we still maintain the art of treachery and deception and fraud against the living. So we are indentured into false light. So we don't know how to ask questions. To answer your question in my roundabout way, my short answer is we don't know how to pose questions, much less answer them, because everything is foundationally premised in what I would loosely term false light, and false light adherence, and false light worship, which is iconoclasticism, which is where we project and we surrogate. We don't own ourselves. We don't own those in the Indian gurus or sadhus will refer to as the Atman, the actualized man, the Adamite. We don't own that Christed aspect of who and what we are. And because we don't own that Christed aspect of who and what we are foundationally, we naturally allow ourselves to be dream spelled, culturally engineered, and harvested into iconography, iconoclasticism, false light worship, religiosity, adherence to government, terrified and traumatized by the creature that we pay taxes in order to harm us. And so it goes on. It's all biofeedback. All of it is just meta biofeedback of the most grotesque proportions imaginable. Frankly, makes the tribulation, the reckoning, and the revelations in the Bible look like, a cute story. It's a lot worse than all of that. We're so deeply, deeply lost to self, to the actualized aspect of self. So how do we, you and I, because I'm only concerned about you, Jason, and myself, because this is the perfect geometry of now, and you and I are the Godhead making that pure inquiry in the void, in the great realm of the abyss, the unknown. So let's identify it. What is it that we are trying to identify in the first place? What I've learned is that everything that has been constructed in the temporal realm by man, by ideation and the manifest property is all indentured into what I call entropy, dissolution, decay, and death. That is foundationally illegal in terms of natural law. It's unlawful. It's illicit. It is out of coherence. Nothing is meant to corrupt, corrode, and move into dissolution and die. The Western mind is become used to the idea of death and has even tried to beautify it and lionize it and talk about, oh, it's all natural, part of natural. No, it's not natural, actually. No. And you see, it's part of that malaise in the liberal intellectual mind that has taken us into accepting as normal entropy, death, disease, decay, corruption. I don't. I absolutely, vehemently reject all of that at the soul level, because I happen to know that we are not meant to be corrupted, and that when we re-engage our true inquiry as to who we truly are in our majestic Christed nature, then we arrest and apprehend all the machinations of entropy. It can no longer hold thrall in the temporal realm. There are advanced species out there that have clocked that a long time ago and are living for hundreds of thousands of years, or until such time as they choose to soul migrate. Is that that's the kind of language that we should be talking, Jason. That's why I'm taking it into this space, because that's my answer. My answer is, we don't even know what to inquire about in the normal sense. We're still talking politics and deception and lies. I don't want to talk about that crap. I don't want to talk about how to heal from cancer. I know how to heal from cancer. I know how simple it is to heal from cancer. So do you, by best account. But the point is, I want to be having real conversation, real inquiry. I want to be apprehending the limitlessness, the ineffable nature of reality, and projecting plasma into that field of expression, because that then becomes the biofeedback at the galactic level. We ought to completely shift tram lines now from the old dualistic, binarized, love, hate, war, peace, up, down, life, death, bullshit. Just white it all out and move into the quantum realm. We're at that point now. I guarantee you, by the year 2030, when time itself will no longer be acknowledged at the civilizational level, because within 10 years, we will come to the reckoning and the realization that tick-tock 1260 time and a 12-month Babylonian, Julian, Gregorian calendric system has been at the root of all of our ills for a very long time. When we relinquish and release ourselves from adherence to the greatest false light title of all, which is the idea of time, we move into our default. And our default as the Adamite, the Christed ones, is to become immortal instantly, because we fractate, the holonomic field fractates around us. That's the conversation we should be having. That's the kind of inquiry we should be pursuing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot. So, but I fully agree with you. And this has been a path that my wife and I have been on for the last while too, is it's really around how do you just even start the process of shedding off all of the stuff that's not self, to even start to actually get to a point where you can recognize or feel what actually being connected to true self even feels like anymore. And this is like, even talking to people like Huna Flash, he was actually a Lemurian light shaman. He was the person we talked to last. And I mean, it's really neat even speaking to some of these people too, because they don't really live in the same world that most people live in. I mean, they don't see this linear, one-dimensional reality. I mean, they live in a multi-dimensional, non-linear way. And even speaking to him and trying to get certain, concepts kind of pulled together for people to be able to even interpret can be really tricky, because they just don't, it's not even a part of their reality. And he doesn't look at the Gregorian calendar. He looks at a Lemurian calendar. So everything that he looks at is completely different. And even the importance of how he won't even want to use even terms like, Pisces or Aquarius or whatever, because even those have all been manipulated to some point. And from his perspective, it's like language itself is a part of these light codes that we are receiving and this information that we're going to get. So it's a really interesting perspective, because it's where do people start that process when they realize that almost everything they've been a part of has been illusionary, like everything. And so, like you say, you're so far in it, you don't even know that you're in it. So your concept of what is truth is so, you really don't know. And so to me, a lot of the work that happens, or the process, is this process of like purifying, even like Huna Flash does a process where they actually try to, it's a seal that he does where he brings you back to first light. So it's sort of removing in some ways all of this distorted light, as he will call it, to get back to the essence of who we are, so that then we can start to, from that place, now start to experience life from that very different place. And even work by, I think, Jacqueline Hobbs, like Oracle Girl, a lot of her work is purification. It's the same idea of just purifying what's not self, to eventually just naturally arrive at something that is self, that which is ultimately pure love. And when people start to have that experience, I feel like that's when what you're talking about, we now start to connect to something that is so much more vast and exciting than anything that we have ever been privy to prior to that.
Well, I'm inclined to agree partially with what you're saying, but I'm also nervous about some of it, because I could build an argument that vehemently disagrees with everything you just said, and that actually it's the actualized human being in a state of discrete expression and expressiveness, separate to that great big typhonic pool of love, that is the special thing. That is why we bifurcated, or not bifurcated. It's why we splintered off from source in the first place, in a sense, which of course the religious minds then distorted into being a great fall. It wasn't a fall at all from grace. It was a monumental undertaking to mindfully leave or splinter away from the principle of prior unity, to coin Adida Samraj's expression, my beloved belated friend. But so on the one hand, it's the fact that we are dirty little splinters from the principle of prior unity that, incarnate in multiple different quadrants of multiple omniverses in order to, constantly explore the great unknown, and are sending back through the linguistic wave genetics, are sending back to source the stories that we're divining out there in the great unknown. All of that's also beautiful. I don't know that I want to fall back into a great big typhonic state of love and love. Of course, I know what you mean, and of course you're right when it comes to that. But I don't know. It's a bit of this and a bit of that. I think the question is more, what are we doing to realize the full potential of our creative impetus. So that's the kind of thing which I think we ought to be, because the fact of the matter is that most people aren't ready to move back into the principle of typhonic love and consciousness, because they're still identifying or seeking and assembling within themselves the creative mind, and they're still exploring on the palette of life or of expression. And until they have painted the perfect painting on the perfect canvas of the perfect life, they're going to continue to move into discovery and exploration. So yeah, it's just it's a curious thing. We could take any perspective and wax lyrical at it for forever. But I think that we ought to be all in a state of bliss. We ought to be all in a state of euphoria. And at the same time, in that state of bliss and euphoria, we ought to be very, very realized, discrete, as in DISCRETE, individual expressions, and realizing limitless potentials in that. But that's the nature of fractality. I mean, you study the work of Bernold Mandelbrot and Mandelbrotian mathematics, fractality, which of course you drop enough acid or gargle enough ayahuasca or chew enough magic mushrooms or DMT, you're going to kind of go into some of those spaces. But when you do it without that, I've never chewed a magic mushroom or smoked marijuana in my life, but I've been into that fractal zone. And that was where I learned the alpha omega language, I mean, within myself, and then did my best to retrieve that language in restoring my senses, back on earth. But I see the beauty of that when you move into the fractal domain. And even now you can do that with those equations, and you just see those fractal universes opening up and endlessly exploring. That's something else, with the dream time and what just activated at Uluru in the last couple of weeks. I mean, that was proper, the serpent rainbow activating. That's moving from spellbinding into dream timing.
Yeah. That I want you to talk about that a little bit too, because when we heard about that, and it's still, even when you mention it, gives me goosebumps all over when I think about it. And these are the kind of things when to me, when people question, is this just a pandemic, and kind of leave it at that, it's like, oh my gosh, like there are people that have basically since birth been primed for this time. Like this is an important time. There's a lot going on. And if you can kind of get outside of your bubble of reality and start to look at what else is going on, I mean, this is a really big time. So maybe you can share a little bit about what went on with in Australia with Uluru and the elders.
Sure. Well, I mean, when you refer to the elders, I mean, I deal with some of the elders and proper walkers, and I'm blessed to know them, really blessed and honored, deeply honored, to be able to occasionally meet them over Skype and or Zoom and have very, very meaningful conversations and storytelling. So I'm familiar, and I've been familiar for a long time with much of the cosmogenetic or cosmogenesis narrative of the Australians as the First Nation peoples of the world, the First Nation peoples. And I'm not convinced myself that that's the case at all. And I'd be stoned to death in parts of Australia for daring to say that. But I'm genuinely not convinced. I'm also speaking to the king in Southern Africa at the moment, and the royal family, and they are providing forensics. I've had 2 amazing conversations just in the last week alone with the king, and I'm about to receive the forensics on the DNA of the Khoisan, the Khoisan, the Bushmen of Southern Africa. And they say that they've got the forensic evidence that their DNA is way older than the Aboriginal or the Siberian or anything. So look, when you talk about Uluru and you talk about the mysteries that issue from that part of the world, I'm not going to play any of that down. There is a lot of sacred language and power and magic that is issuing from that part of the world. Australia is a profoundly compromised part of the world. There's a reason why the Illuminati have sought to preserve Australia as their own playground, kept the population to a minimum, heavily militarized the place with military bases and with underground, deep underground military bases as well, and a lot of extraterrestrial alien technology engagement and sequestration underground. And a lot of weird shit going on, basically. Why? Because of the fact that there are hyperdimensional elements that issue from Australia that are of profound consequence and significance for the entire Earth plane. Those stories will become known very, very soon. The 21st of December 2020 was to answer your question, was a signature event dateline, because in a sense it was the fulmination of the dateline that the end of the long count Sulcan of the Mayans spoke to, which was 21st of December 2012. You factor that there is a discrepancy between the Gregorian Julian calendric system and the long count Sulcan of the Mayans. It's about an 8-year differential there. In a sense, they're both correct. 21st of December 2012 was an awakening, a tremendous upsurge in awakening. We've seen that planetarily. We've seen how that's played out. That is beyond dispute. 21st of December 2020 was a different format. It was a reformatting taking place. That, in a sense, was the plaster being ripped off. And what did we see subsequent to the 21st of December 2020 and the 6th of January? We saw how ugly, what we described at the beginning of this conversation. We saw the sheer extent, breadth, width, and depth of depravity that we've arrived at as a civilization in terms of the systems, the chronology, the pathology of dominion and supremacy, human to human. That's what we have to now deal with, the reckoning that we fucked up in such an extraordinarily unholy way. And that reckoning is something we have to own. So I'm able to own it, I know, because I process that every day of my life. Again, through linguistic wave genetics, through being able to empathize intelligently, so walk in life unmolested, never allowing molestation against me or against the vulnerable, the weak, or the infirm, protecting all around you and conducting no harm, loss, or injury to another living soul. That's it. So that's my predisposition, my proclivity, my prerogative. It's how I live my life. I don't take shit from anyone, and I don't acquiesce or take the knee, ever, under any circumstances, not to any angel, not to any Jesus Christ, not to any Ganesh, not to any icon or idol outside of there. Absolutely not. And that in a sense then gives me the set of tools to be able to navigate through the shadow of death, because you're owning all of it. You're owning the entire repertoire of darkness that I was born into. But I've learned what it is that brings about abject war and disease and poverty in the world. I've learned and I've studied and I've sat and I've observed and I've borne witness, and I have been very, very patient and maintained stamina in that inquiry. And got to a point where I recognize that I am the determiner of the outcome and I am the arbiter of the outcome. Always was, always will be. And that's the new man, the new human. That is what issued out of Uluru, coming from the paramagnetic earth and marrying with the dielectric universe, was that new lingo, that new language, which is that the Adamite is now rising up and standing squarely on his two legs. He is no longer an infant or an imbecile. He will no longer be mind-fucked by governments or indentured as a plantation slave into registrations and tabulations and all the heinous witchery of governments and municipalities and all of their fetid little systems, dirty little tricks on paper, their little bonds and spells. No, thank you. I am the Adamite. I am that I am. I am the Christed one. I am the Son of God. I am the daughter of God. I own that. I am the Alpha and the Omega. You see, that's a language which hitherto would have had me burnt at the stake, or you burnt at the stake. But fortunately, we allowed Babylon to exercise the Phoenicians and the Venetians and the Vatican complex and the governments of the world and all the satanic Luciferian nonsense. We allowed it to play its hand and expose itself right up until the 6th of January, 2020. And we saw what it means. It means that there is one single soul in Congress in the United States who is a real human. And all the rest around him are backstabbing, serpentine Judases, dirty, dirty actors, all of them. Now, that's part of the trolling exercise that I believe that one Donald J. Trump and a clutch of Pentagon and NSA white hats have trolled Capitol Hill. They trolled Congress, both parties. They trolled the US Supreme Court. I was saying before that happened, that Amy Barrett Comey, watch that woman. That is not a healthy woman. If you know who that woman is, she's not a nice piece of work at all. That woman is diabolical. Mike Pence has always been diabolical. But the point I'm making is that they're all serpentine creatures. If you do triangulate using the Hawking's scale of consciousness, scalar, soul frequency stuff, the only one of them who comes out on top is Donald Trump, curiously enough. Love or hate him, he has healthy numbers. All the rest of them, including General Flynn and Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and all the cavalry that everyone thinks is coming to rescue the world, their numbers are absolutely rotten on that scale of integrity, of clarity, of honor, of all the rest of it. So we've arrived at that point. That's what we've brought ourselves to. Now, who amongst us, Jason, can own that? That now becomes the only question. Well, I can tell you who owns it. People who don't wear masks own it. And people who wear masks don't own it. It's as simple as that. So you can look, or let me be more polite. People who choose to wear masks. Okay, because a lot of people who I appreciate are doing it for whatever wanky reason they're coming up with. I don't accept any of that, incidentally. You just don't do it. You do not do anything that offends your soul under any circumstances ever in this world or the next. That is the true language of any of us who claim to be anywhere near enlightened. You don't do anything that offends the soul. But I appreciate that many people are still, put it this way, debating with themselves on those psycho-spiritual and morality issues. Mm-hmm. But that's what we've come to, a bifurcation of the light from the shade, which is to say those who are walking through the valley of death and fearing no ill, and those who are succumbing along the way and doing the bidding of Lucifer.
Yeah, I mean, you said a lot there, Sasha. I think one of the things that resonates with me around that is what is coming up for everybody right now. And this is something, I mean, all we can do is kind of come back to ourselves and recheck within ourselves. And I feel like what's coming up for so many, we're getting so many opportunities now to get a sense of what actually, if I really can strip down, what actually feels right for me, and am I acting in accordance with that, or am I acting out in sort of discord to that? And to me, that's what's coming on everything, whether you're talking about masks, whether you're talking about vaccinations, whether you're talking about whatever you want to talk about. But it's come up in abundance in 2020. And I feel like that's part of what, I mean, that's part of the rub is it's basically to try and get us to come back to reevaluate as best as we can. And part of this is because we've also been so sort of trapped in this illusionary world, but the way out in my mind is to reconnect to what ultimately feels inherently right for you, and then stay in alignment with that, wherever that is, right? Like you can only do with what ultimately you feel like at that point in time. You talked about David Hawkins, and I was a longtime student of David Hawkins. I worked with him for a long time. We used to, and his work with power versus force and the levels of consciousness is in my mind, it's such a great template to understand where we feel and what place we're looking at reality from. So, and I've been fascinated by some of the work you've done the last while when you guys have been sort of calibrating the different things. And I calibrated some of that early on, and I got similar numbers to things too. And so even if I couldn't intellectually make sense of certain things, I knew that there was a certain level of truth to what was there. And then what that did is it allowed me to remain open enough and curious enough to explore other avenues and possibilities that were maybe outside of what my current belief structure was. This is what I think everybody is getting an opportunity to play with right now. It's like, can you, you know, as much as even like, you know, go in the politics, it's like, we're in Canada. I think probably almost everybody I ever talked to despises Donald Trump. They can't get past kind of the person that he is, or how he seems to be portrayed in mass media, all this sort of stuff.
It's not true. Don't finish that sentence, because it's not that they can't get past anything. What they can't get past, Jason, is their own cult programming. And that's the tragedy. And that's where the pathos is that every one of the imbeciles that you're referring to, that you speak to in the course of, you know, normal life, are people who themselves are deeply, deeply indentured into the most vapid and reductive cult programming psyop in the history of our world. And all the shame is upon them. Donald Trump is just another man. Actually, he happens to have very good numbers, relatively speaking, compared to all the rest of them. Yeah. He's 500-600% over any of the figures we've done in Congress or in Washington, D.C. or Capitol Hill or the Pentagon. So he seems to be, he doesn't have high numbers if you put him alongside, Yogananda and Mahatma Gandhi. No, he's got low numbers comparatively, obviously. But in that world where he is clearly an avatar, he is soaring above them like an eagle, and he's a lot of heart space connected to relationships, connected to the pulse of humanity. That makes him an avatar. And so we're seeing in Washington, and the reason why I emphasize Washington is because America is the pulse of humanity. It's every culture. We are America. The world is America. And both sides of the aisle, it's not even about Republican and Democrat. It's about shadow versus shadow now. So it's two shadow elements pitted at one another. That's what it's come to. That's what all the hierarchical systems of governance have arrived at, shadow versus shadow. So anything that can cleave through that shadowland and then elevate and transmute through its own radiance, even if it's only a low, marginally higher value, that's where Donald Trump comes in. That's the alchemy we're seeing. I was mortified and almost suicidal 24 hours ago when we finally got all the numbers in on all of these characters who the rest of the world think are the white hats and the cavalry. The numbers are terrible, crushingly awful, dangerous, like turn away and run from these people. And everyone thinks they're the cavalry, they're going to save us. No, it's a different kind of alchemy taking place. So it's like the shadow versus the shadow. Capitol Hill is going to collapse. Washington is going to collapse. The Vatican is already in free fall. By best accounts, we'll know in the next few days. Crown of England is absolutely in free fall as well. So either way, the tripartite of power, as we've known it in the world for 2,000 years, older actually, is all but over. So we're living through the fall in that sense of the citadel of Babylon. And all of us need to now plug into our own auto-determination. Number one, get that fucking vaccination out of my face. Get it out of my face. Get it out of my children's face. A friend of mine told me on the phone last night, and she'll probably be watching this. And she said, oh, but my son is recruited, conscripted into the forces, and he has to. They have to get the injection, the mandatory injection. And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, she says he said no for the first round, and they allowed him to step out of the queue, but now it's mandatory. Now he has to. And I said, listen to what you're saying. No, he doesn't have to. And that's the point. There is no discussion about salaries and pensions and about conscription contracts and all of that shit. That's all a load of nonsense. Right to life, Geneva Convention, Nuremberg Code, right to life, UCC law, get out of my face. And the fact that we allow ourselves to believe that we are required to do something is not the same thing as us being forced to do it. But we've got to make that distinction, Jason. And what I find is that most people fail at just that bit of clarity, because I have all the power and no one will ever stick a vaccination needle into me. And I'm living in a foreign country, and I'm living, at the jackboots of a military regime here that could come in, kick the doors down essentially, and pin you up against a wall. Is it going to happen? No, it's not going to happen, because I know how to be the arbiter and determiner of outcomes in this world. And it's a universal law, and it applies in this world and the next world. But it does mean standing inside that flame of the Christed nature and knowing your power and your majesty. It's not up for arbitration. It's not up for debate. I know exactly who I am. And that, I think, once that becomes the true pandemic, and let's face it, that is the new pandemic. The real pandemic is the awakening, that wonderful viral transmission of awakening that's happening morphogenetically across the human family. That I can see the victory already. I've already seen the change in fractality of the vibral light in the last 48 hours, and it's not my imagination. And I know it's connected to something that's happening in Rome. I know that because you unlock certain Babylonian spells in Rome, in the Vatican complex. You change the geometry of the atoms of our world instantaneously. The same thing will happen incrementally. We're moving into a very beautiful story.
I'm excited to see where that story is going to keep going and being a part of that. But I think right now, like you're saying, the concept of being sovereign right now is connecting to your truth and then acting from that place. No questions. I think that's what everybody, I know when I have conversations with people that are, say, concerned about the vaccination or concerned about certain things, and it's like, this is what we are all being asked to come to. Nobody can make this decision for you. This is ultimately something that we have to come to and decide what feels right from us, and not try to, the brain always tries to, because of the programming, we're always trying to rationalize a way to sort of, succumb a little bit, or to step away from what we innately know to be true, I think. And this is what I think is being dismantled a little bit, or this is the opportunity that we're all getting presented with. It's like, where do you start? Where do you start with kind of acting from that place of truth within yourself?
Do you choose life or do you choose death? It's coming down to that. And I think that's perfect geometry. How else did we imagine that the alchemical bifurcation would take place at the end of days, in the great reckoning, the great tribulation? How the hell did we anticipate it would roll out? We all knew it was coming. Well, here it is. It's arrived a little sooner than many of us thought, a lot more uncomfortable than many thought. But actually, I think it's perfect. And it's a choice between the right to life or preference to die. And if you willfully choose to roll up a sleeve and receive Bill Gates's satanically constructed oxidative enzyme vaccination into your arm with all these nanobots and what have you, we can tell. I've been conducting, as you probably know, endless roundtables and judicial commissions of inquiry into COVID corona. I've interviewed probably 40 of the top 50 figures in the world, and I'm in close touch with most of them on a daily basis, weekly basis. So I'm very, very well informed. I know exactly what is taking place in the endogenous, mutating and engineering of RNA. This is as sinister and evil as it possibly gets. A catch-all, satanic, weaponized system that endogenously manufactures a different form of human, removes our capacity for empathy and compassion by targeting chromosomes 1, 2, and 8, or whatever it is, and essentially culling our species by sterilizing us at the same time. So, where are the piles of bodies? of people who are dying in hospitals. Well, we all know the hospitals are empty. We've connected to whistleblowers all around the world, literally all around the world, in dozens of countries. They're all sending us footage all the time of empty hospitals. No one's dying. There are strains of weaponized or bioweapon strains out there, which are probably being released through canisters in different parts of the world to create little scares here and there. But there is no pandemic at all. If there is a pandemic, it's connected to the 5G activations going on and the fact that our era is becoming weaponized. And as Steiner and others taught us well over a century ago, when the human or where any life system is under, or biological system is under endemic or existential threat, it goes into toxic shock at some level, and then it begins to excrete through an exosomic response and releases those little packages into the ethers, which insidious and ignorant scientists came along and said, oh, we'll call that a virus. No, leave it alone. It's an exosome. It'll do unto itself. Nature has a wonderful way of cleansing itself, just like happened in the Gulf of Mexico oil spill a few years ago. If you remember, we were all being told, that's it, it's all over, it's going to desecrate, 2 continents are going to perish. No, I was the Director General at the United Nations at the time for renewable energies in that sector, in the IGO sector. I was the man writing the white paper for the Oval Office on the emergency response to it. I was the one speaking to leading scientists in the world at that time who were all clamoring to us because we held that station in the United Nations, and I was the Director General. So I was seeing all the top science in the world coming in as it pertains to remediating oil spills. And what I started to see was, hang about, this Exxon BP, whatever oil spill is a rigged game. It's an insurance racket. There's all sorts of things going on. It's playing into the green economy. It's playing into the whole filthy, dirty little, what was that moron's name with his little climate change PowerPoint, Al Gore, the Greta Thunberg generation of sociopath. So all of that was playing out because they were trying to weaponize air and monetize it as well through carbon credits and all the rest of the deception that was going on. At the same time, I'm being hit up at the UN by scientists and brilliant physicists who are saying, well, actually, we can give you a little powder which you can scatter into the water. It'll self-replicate and microbial algae, and it'll eat the oil and turn it into all sorts of positive building blocks, and the place will thrive by this time next year. And I'm like, what? Are you for real? And it was absolutely for real. So we got together, fishermen. I can't remember, it was 3,000 or 30,000. I think it was probably 3,000 boats. We mobilized, and we're going to have those 3,000 boats with this microbial algae powders and just go into the Gulf and to scatter the powders, sit back, and within a few weeks, the algae would eat the oil and everything would flourish. No. And then you see what's really going on and how those scenarios get blocked at that level. And you realize it's all just a goddamn scam. I'm not quite sure why I went off on that tangent, but forgive me.
Well, I think those are important tangents, though, because it's like when you start to see certain things happening across different areas of whether it's politics or medicine or wherever you want to see, you start to see things that seem to make such logical sense and would like something like, that would be incredibly frustrating to be in that position, to see certain solutions. And then for some reason, they get kind of red taped away. It's like, you just have to kind of put your hands up like, well, that makes no common sense. So it's like something else has to be going on when that's happening.
Unless you then, as the only reason why I hacked into the UN was because I wanted to prove to myself that that transnational globalist Sabbatean agenda was more real than real. I needed to know that for myself.
Right.
And I did discover that, absolutely, and got all the evidences of that. And I'm sad to say that most of the brass that were around me at that time, 10 years ago, are either behind bars or dead, murdered. So what I saw going on in the UN at that time was very real. what I called out at that time was very real. I've got the records. At some point, I'll probably publish all of that stuff. But the point is, all of that witchery does make sense when you understand it within the context of ritual sacrifice of innocence, harvest of humanity, Freemasonic dream spelling, Sabbatean Luciferic logic, and population reduction control, and eradication, actually genocide, eugenics. So you move from genocide to eugenics, and then understanding that eugenics and the tampering with human genetics is connected to an off-world agenda with oftentimes far-flung star systems and intelligences that are vicariously living through demonics, realms, and possessed humans. Now, that's not something new. That's been going on also for thousands of years. But the fact is, it's become very, very locked and loaded now, where you've got the portals of power in the religious institutions, in the banking institutions, in the big corporations and the high street, in the advertising giants, in Hollywood, in academia, and obviously in all governments on earth, which are all privately owned corporations masquerading as governments. You've got all of that apparatus, infrastructure of, again, supremacy, control, and dominion that is tooled and purposed toward one thing, which is genocide and eugenics, population reduction and eugenics. Why the eugenics? What's going on? Why the need to tamper with human genes? What are they trying to do? I mean, forget pedophilia and pedophile rings and sexual blackmail being behind most of the ills in the military, in the army, and in the portals of government. Forget that for a moment. Adrenochrome harvesting, underground factories, breeding farms of children, the 800,000 plus kids in North America alone that are going missing every single year, most of them, and never being seen again. Okay, these are not truants. These are not kids who run away from home. All of that stuff, what is going on? What is going on off-world? What's going on the dark side of the moon or inside the moon? What's going on in deep underground military bases here? What's going on in Mars? What's going on in other planets in the solar system? Is jump gate technology real? Absolutely, it's real. I've spoken to astronauts who tell me it's real. Is anti-grav and cloaking technology real? Absolutely. Been with us for almost a century, certainly 3/4 of a century. Are we able to travel hyperdimensionally? Can we fold time-space? Absolutely. I know science physicists right now I can phone up and will explain the equations, mathematical equations to doing that, and want to build the prototypes. But of course, you know, that's something that's contained by the deep state. You know, all of that. Do we have replicator technology? Can we press a button and manufacture bacon and eggs on a plate? Yes, we can. We know about the isotope frequencies of bacon and eggs and grilled tomato and wholemeal toast and butter and ceramic plate. We know the isotopes. We know how to triangulate that with supercomputation. We know how to reformat atoms, cells, molecules through replicator technology. Why are we still playing Stone Age, that people are starving on the planet? That's a bloody good question. Let's ask ourselves that question. Well, of course, I know the answer to that. And that's where the United Nations comes in. That's why I hacked into that godless organization, to understand how the Sabbatean logic is playing out, how it's infiltrated the portals of power, all governments on the face of the earth, how every single congressman, every single parliamentarian, every single prime minister, president, head of state is indentured to the same satanic forces that indenture us at birth through the registration processes. And so it goes on. And what I can tell you, Omega point to all of this, Jason, is that we can release ourselves from indentureship just like that with one breath, by just doing it. And I think that we needed to have a certain change in the ethers, let's say, in this temporal veil, before we could actually do that. Now we can. To answer this question of Uluru, what happened around the world, but certainly stemming from Australia, and 21st of December last month, the awakening of the rainbow serpent, that's what happened. We've now got the ethers unlocking, the vibral light coding and matrices that make up our reality are now pregnant, ripe, ready, willing, and able to receive our dreams and our true ideation, provided our ideation has stepped away from the entropic and the parasitic and is now in a state of grace.
Beautifully said, Sasha. And from talking to some of the different people too, when they talk about basically that a lot of light has come in, and like you said, I think we've needed some assistance in that way to be even able to kind of make that next sort of almost quantum leap to be able to see our world in a different light. It makes me think very similar to when we talk about even like David Hawkins' work with levels of consciousness. It's like, and just for people that aren't familiar with that, you can check out, Power versus Force was Dr. David Hawkins' first book, and it breaks down levels of consciousness. And this is something that I talk about a lot too. And the idea is that it's a logarithmic scale. So little changes are big bumps in the numbers. So it's not like moving from 200 to 205. That's actually a pretty substantial jump, right?
Right.
And the idea is that everything below 200 is basically anti-life. Everything above 200 is pro-life in many ways, just to simplify it. And so at the bottom of the scale is feelings like shame, guilt. They calibrate very low. And if you just pay attention to how we are almost set things up to feel, shame is a very common feeling that a lot of people experience. And it's actually, there's a dynamic created where people feel shame very easily, even around exactly what's going on now. If you don't wear your mask, for example, then you should almost be shamed that you're not wearing it. You're not doing your part to look after other people. There's a lot of stuff set up to create a feeling like that. And when you're in that state of consciousness, your world becomes very small. Your ability to create change in your life and any kind of change in the world around you becomes very, very limited. And so
well stated, very well stated.
And so when we look at the level of 200 is the level of courage and integrity. And that's when you start to make positive steps forward. And how this was calibrated for a long time was Dr. Hawkins, I believe the population of the world, humanity as a whole, calibrated somewhere around 205 or 206 or somewhere in that realm. So it was just above as a collective. But that actually, according to Dr. Hawkins' research, about 80 or 85% of the population individually was actually just below 200, and 15% that calibrated above that actually raises the level of the sea. Yes, and so to me, what I think is going on right now is when I understand this as more light coming in, we are collectively seeing the consciousness of humanity as a whole is starting to come up, 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 up. Now, even if that makes a jump from like 205 to like 230 collectively or 240, that is a massive, massive shift in consciousness. And with shifts in consciousness comes changes in perspective. You climb higher up the mountain, you see a different vista, right? And so once you kind of even move into different states of consciousness, you see things from a different perspective, and you almost can't take that back. It's like, if you climb high enough up the mountain, it's not that the higher part of the mountain is better than the lower part. The view is going to be inherently different. And when I think collectively, when we are moving and this light is coming in, our consciousness is starting to awaken a little bit. We're moving higher up the scale. We start to see things larger. We see more pieces of the picture. And it's not like we're even trying to, it's an inherent part of just shifts in consciousness. And to me, this is kind of what's going on. And I get really excited about it because I feel like this is part of humanity's next phase of evolution. This is what's taking place right now.
Yeah, without a doubt. And that means first clearing the basement and airing the basement. And that's what we're doing right now. So, acknowledging in the first instance the ritual sacrifice of innocence and the pedophilia and all of that stuff, and then dealing with the religious institutions, and the fact that we've been so deeply indentured to idolatry, which has nothing to do with what we believed we were doing for thousands of years. With our prayer beads and our crucifixes and what have you, we were deeply indentured into Luciferianism, false light worship. So to own that at the soul level is tough. There's a lot of reckoning to be done there by each of us. How millions of parents today are having to deal with the reckoning that they allowed surgeons to snip the foreskins off their little baby boys, and in North Africa and throughout the Levant, snip the clitoris off their little girls, and the sacrilege that was done there to babes, to infants, the desecration of the capacity for blissful orgasm. That's a particular kind of evil that each of us need to address the part that we've played in that through our cultural ignorance. And once we've dispensed with all of that and dispensed with the guilt that comes with it, then of course you're absolutely right. Then the next thing is we start dialing up on that consciousness scale, exponentially, until we move fully into our bliss peak wave. And that ultimately I see happening in our generation. When I say our generation, I mean before you and I naturally leave this plane of existence. Actually, I believe that none of us will need to die, particularly. I think that we're moving now so quickly into, I don't want to sound cocky, but it's not that I think, it's that I know, because I know where we're at with respect to these advances in the arts and the sciences, that we ought to be moving only into dissolution, the rainbow body, when we choose to soul migrate or plasma project off this world. It should be a choice, and it'll be at that we will reach that point where we choose to soul migrate, and that we can choose the hour of death in that sense. I mean, my master, Maharaj Sharan Singh Ji, in the 90s, left this world, and he woke up perfectly well in the morning at the ashram in the Punjab, and he alerted his lawyers and his family and asked them to please all gather at the compound at 11 a.m. He wanted to have a meeting, and his administrators and his lawyers and his family all arrived at his compound at 11 a.m. sharp. And the great white bearded master came out and embraced them all, and in 1 hour dealt with all of his worldly affairs, delegated his authorities, bid everyone who were very perplexed goodbye, lay down, shut his eyes, and at midday, exactly 1 hour later, left his body. And by sundown, he was burnt on the river Ganges. Now, that's how we ought to leave this world. Very neat, very tidy, no psycho-emotional hysteria, no great vacuum and tragedy. It should be just a beautiful, dignified, noble passage and transition from one state to the next. And we are moving toward that space. Once we've remembered our Majesty and who we are, we'll disidentify very quickly from the mania of emotionalism, and even worse, psycho-emotionalism. And once we've overcome that and transitioned that, or transmute or transcended that psycho-emotional, and I'm being careful with what I say here, because I also appreciate that it's that aspect of the human that makes us so bloody wonderful as well. That we are emotional creatures and creative creatures. It's our creativity and our emotionality that make us so amazing at the kind of cosmic level. And it's certainly why we're so sought after as a gene, which is why all these draconian forces are hacking into us through Bill Gates and their earthly proxies. So there's wonderful stories intertwined in this story of our own redemption. But here we are.
Oh, what was I going to say? There was something that came up there. When you were talking about that we will have the you believe we'll have the chance or know that we will have this sort of opportunity to kind of choose how and when we want to go out. I remember Dr. Hawkins, when he had gone through at the level of 600, which is kind of at that level of infinite peace, that you are given the choice of whether you want to leave your body or stay in your body. And he had had that personal experience at that time. So he was kind of in that state and then decided he could leave or he could go, leave his body there. And he laid down in the forest and he could just leave it there. Or he decided, well, might as well come back because he had some other work he wanted to do still. So I totally think that there's so much available to us when we, and this is part of what, this is why it's so important to maintain openness and curiosity and playfulness with life in a lot of ways, because that's how we just keep this questioning, you know, we keep this openness, and this is what allows us to just keep growing and expanding. And and the reality is we don't know what's possible until we move into this next phase. And then it's like, it's a whole new dimension. It really is. It's sort of like, and tools that you would be privy to here, you're not down here yet. So it's like, you know, you don't know until you're there, which is kind of the fun part of just, you know, enjoying the ride as we go along with this thing and staying open and curious around it. So the other thing that I think when you mention Luciferic energy, this is a very real thing. And again, because we've talked about sort of consciousness, Dr. Hawkins would talk about Luciferic energy, and what the essence of that is it's distorting truth for falsehood. So it basically tries to distort it in a way where you believe something to be truthful that is actually false. And that's essentially what that energy does. And he kind of broke the difference between Luciferic energy and satanic energy, and they have different sort of aspects. But Luciferic, he said, was almost the most dangerous because it completely distorted truth and falsehood. And so what we tend to believe is truth is actually falsehood, and then that directs our life in a certain way.
Well, it's a quid pro quo as well. So in the dualistic paradigm, which we do inhabit, it is that polarity or that dichotomy of light and shade, or certainly we're talking about the shade here, which lends the traction against which the light defines itself. And there's a tremendous beauty to that. But the tragedy or the tragic comedy of the binarized dualistic universe or quadrant of the universe that we inhabit is that the collateral there is pain and sorrow, because it's all predicated on the trial of separation, which is never being happy with our lot, always feeling as though we're the victim of something, because in a sense we are. If we're living in that parasitic, binarized, dualistic reality field, the dark defines itself by devouring the light and eating its life force in order to energize itself and gain traction. So in the same way that these draconian off-world intelligences are vicariously living through their demonic temporal proxies, like Anthony Fauci or Hillary Clinton, my two favorite, Nancy Pelosi, classic example. But now most of these characters in the portals of power are shadow players, shadow actors. And they are the utility of those egregore energies or hyperdimensional elemental intelligences that live through them and direct them. In the case of an Anthony Fauci, which I would keep bringing up as the most obvious example, because that son of a bitch is the kind of glowering, leprechaun that's kind of staring at us, from the lower astral realms, because it's that creature has spent 50 years, half a century in power, working and defining and moving into all like a sleaze bag, moved into all these different crevices in order to define exactly how and when to strike at the human genome. And of course, COVID-19, 19 years after Twin Towers, which was a Gog and Magog Babylonian ritual, COVID-19, COVID, certification of vaccine identification, 2019, the Genesis in Wuhan district, 19 years after Gog and Magog, Twin Towers. All of this satanic Language is connected. Moderna, which is the progenitor of the vaccination, MODERNA, modification of endogenous RNA. And I could go on and on. Just study the patents, go and read the patents that the Bill Gates Foundation took out on these. And Anthony Fauci's holding billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of patents as well. And many of these patents have been orchestrated and written in Sabbatean satanic coded language. This is very important to these kinds of creatures, but it is a surreptitious, incremental takeover of humanity, operating in the dielectric spheres and the earth, the temporal spheres, because they needed to work that way. They needed to gain thrall over our culture, over our civilizational wheel, over our intellect, how we view ourselves through their lens. As the Adamites, as the true sons and daughters of God, we are born, we're chosen, we're taught very quickly to forget who we are. We have our little penises clipped and we have our orgasm ruined. And then we get cult programmed from the age of 5 all the way through. And that's even, not even speaking to the fact that a surgeon's steel blade cut through the umbilical. That's about the most destructive thing you could ever do, is put stainless steel isotopes in contact with symbiotic flesh. That's a language as well of Babylonian mysterium cult. The point I'm making is that all of these travesties have occurred from the Genesis point of coming into this world. So by the time we are spat out of college or university, with a monstrous student loan, of course, just to keep us completely shackled to the plantation, that's it. We've been weaponized, baby. Absolutely weaponized. We are now the utility of the forces that will determine whether or not we can feed ourselves and our families or shelter them. And that's the sinister nature of the false light reality to which we permitted ourselves to become indentured, civilization and generationally. I say no. I say, get thee behind me, Satan. I say, get that syringe out of my face, or I'll pull out a gun and blow your brains out on my doorstep. You are not crossing this threshold. You are not required. Your contract is not welcome here. I want no contract with you. I do not recognize you. There is no understanding here. I do not stand under you here. So get thee behind me, Satan. Take your dirty little toolkit with you, called government and called church, called religion, called whatever. Just take it all away. I am here to define the world now. I am here to define the canvas and paint on the canvas of life. I am here to elevate art, beauty, and consciousness, and to depart from time and money and fear. And you see, it only requires a very small threshold amount of us, Jason, to be making that determination, to flip the script, as you just mentioned with the Hawkins thing, that only took a very small demographic of enlightened people to raise hundreds of millions of billions of people into a higher resonant frequency. That is the nature of our holonomic reality, by the grace of God.
Sasha, I'm cognizant of time here, and I want to have one more question I'd like to ask you as we move forward here. So concepts of things like Nasara, Jasara, where do you see us kind of moving, and what do you feel is going to start to become more mainstream? What do you think is going to start to actually come out of people seeing this on different YouTube videos here and there? Do you think things are going to show up where this information is going to start to become a little bit more mainstream, where people are going to hear it in a way that goes, there's this big aha moment of some sort? And where do you see humanity kind of moving from this point on?
Well, the aha moment is happening right now as we speak. The aha moment is doubtless happening to a great many people who are listening today to your words of wisdom and maybe picking up a few things I'm saying. So the aha moment is happening everywhere all at the same time. Is there going to be a collective threshold event? Of course there is. That's just the nature of how things roll out on an M-set mathematical basis, which is to say reality. It unfolds according to an equation, Z equals Z squared plus C, and that's fractality. That's Mandelbrottian science. So we know how it's going to tip and flip at a given point, like we could predict what was going to happen on the 21st of December, 2020. when is that collective threshold event going to happen? Well, between now and 2023, 24, we're on a race to catch up. We've lost our innocence, and we're on a race for the next 2 or 3 years. I think really between now and the next 3-4 years is a question of playing catch up. So many people around the world, it's a blessed thing, are going to be feverishly, frantically learning and swatting and sharing information, and just so breathing oxygen for the first time in their lives. Even if they're in their 80s or 90s, they are going to be breathing oxygen. I'm being written to. I'm so blessed to receive thousands of messages a day, and I don't know how many I managed to get through now, but on a good day, I've got through up to 1,500 messages by literally for 9 hours, 10 hours, literally just going through them and gleaning. So now I don't have that much time to do it, but I'm still every day seeing them. And I see a lot of people who are in their 70s and 80s who are writing to me and going, I had no idea. I had no idea. And now I get it. And just the thrill, that you can feel the energy and the thrill that's coming in. So I know what that is. And that's the vibral light. And if you or I or any of us can be catalysts for each other, as we are to each other naturally, it's a beautiful thing. And that's certainly, I keep screaming from rooftops and doing my wheezing and shock poetry, because for me, that's the whole process we're in right now. I want to be really present. I said to myself at the beginning of last year, because, okay, I can see the Babylonian witchery is now rolling out. They've cast that shroud. That was a clever move. Honestly, I tipped my cap to Yaldabaoth this time last year. I said, you clever fucker. You know, that was a smart one. I didn't see that one. I saw a bunch of other simulations. I ran simulations for a few years. I didn't see that one coming. And I said, okay, well, in that case, I'm putting all of my plans on hold. And I'm simply going to speak boldly and loudly and very authentically. And I'm not going to couch language. I'm not going to couch anything. I'm going to be absolutely brazen in just speaking to that which I know. So that's all I'm doing at the moment. And I know that just brazen authenticity in a time of great treachery and deceit is a powerful oxygen and a beautiful source of regeneration for people. So as we start to naturally do, because Edna or Timothy listening to this now, the age of 76, really getting it, penny dropping, is now going to go in to their own ecosystem and start to contaminate and defile with irreverence their own ecosystems. And this is beautiful. This is the real dissolution. It's a beautiful dissolution, an alchemical process. And as that happens over the next 3 to 4 years, it's going to give way to something else. And that something else is the real quantum inertia that is now gathering its strength. And this is the morphogenesis. This is the real shift point. I think by the time of 2030 in temporal terms, in the next 9 years, by the time we get to the year 2030, the Luciferic will have played itself out into zero. It would have zeroed itself out. And we'll be at a point then where we're in an amazing sort of downward, when I say downward, I mean without effort, an effortless journey toward full redemption. Redemption arrives almost certainly in the year 2046. Almost certainly that is the dateline that we can hang our hat on. And that's connected more to the micronova event that is planned at that time, scheduled, should I say, by the cosmological clock. Now, when that micronova erupts, the radiance from that, from our sun, is going to sweep through our plane of existence in an unheralded fashion. And that will be truly the descension of the grace of God, which catalyzes the ascension of the sentient life. Now, that ascension phase conjugation that kicks in is really alpha omega point. And I'm speaking to some scientists I'm talking about the most advanced mathematical and physicists in the world who are telling me, one of whom I spoke to earlier today, I can't mention the name, but this is a person who is wanted, okay, is a threat to governments, is a threat to the establishment, and she knows who she is. But she informs me reliably that if we don't have a Tesla shield around the Earth by the year 2046, we're toast. And I think that the Tesla shield is a natural, sentient, organic plasma projection from the awakened humans by that time. We've run the scalar technology against the year 2045, 2046, and 2047. So we did before, after, and during that sun cycle. And indeed, of course, my friends using the technology had no idea what they were looking for. I simply said, can you run the collective frequency of humanity mid 2045 and then mid 2047? They went, my God, there's a spike of off the chart spike that occurs, like there's an enlightenment that happens in that year. And then they ran checks on the year. So it's very, very interesting what we're seeing. So it's corresponding to what we understand of the cosmological cycles. But sorry for waxing on too much there. Bottom line is that 2046 is the true date line, in my view, now of full spectrum ascension, when I believe that we will be fully cohered in the immanent blueprint or template that underpins this rather shoddy entropic 3D temporal format. And that I've seen that blueprint or that template. It's the star body or the celestine template that exists in and around the mortal template. I did witness it in the late 1980s. I was blessed one afternoon in Cologne, Germany, to be removed from my body in a death experience by angelic beings who spent an hour or maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours with me out of body, and then placed me back into my body. And I was able to observe with them this, what I call inverse ascension or reverse ascension process. It is subsequent to that experience in the late 1980s that I had and lived through, that I knew absolutely from that point on that ascension was to take place in my lifetime in this world. And I knew how, more or less, it corresponds, the hyperdimensional physics of it. It's taken me since that time, which is 30 years, to process fully, which is why in the last 15 years, especially, since I retired from rock and roll 20 years ago, I've been so fixated on meeting with scientists and doctors and because I wanted to really get to grips with the hyperdimensional physics. Now I believe I've got a handle on it. Not good enough to write about it yet, and I'm not even good enough to lecture on it, but I think I will. Within a year or so, I'll be able to lecture on it. But for me, Jason, it's happening in our lifetime. We can reconfigure the immanent immortal template. And don't get me wrong, I couldn't give a fig about dying. I've had my disembodied experiences. I'm completely in love with the typhonic state of death. And when I say in love, I mean blissfully so. So it's nothing to do with I'm trying to evade, like Anton, wonderful philosopher, Anton Wilson. He was always saying, I'm not going to die. We're going to discover immortality before we, and of course he died, poor sod, what a legacy. But no, I'm not afraid of death. I'm just fascinated by the intersect between the carnate and the discarnate. And the fact that we can plasma project and make our own determinations at the highest level of soul as to when we soul migrate, when we don't. That to me is sovereignty, the true essence of sovereignty.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful, Sasha. And when you were saying something about the cosmology and the big shift that they were looking in the peaks, it reminds me of I'm going to be talking to Roland McCready down the road here. He's one of the chief scientists for the Heart Math Institute, and I love the work that they do, and they've done some really fascinating stuff. But one of the things that he's really seen is that events in the cosmos, particularly things like solar flares and lots of different shifts that go on, have a direct effect on the Schumann resonance, and they have a direct effect on the electromagnetic frequency that extends off of the heart. And that these things are like absolutely interconnected. And what they found was that a lot of times of major changes on the planet, whether it was major beneficial scientific breakthroughs, or whether it was major events like wars or major political events, major different happenings on Earth always coincided with major changes happening in the cosmos. And because of these changes around the electromagnetic field of the heart. And it's almost like you can be pushed in the direction of what's going to be beneficial or what's going to be not so beneficial in sort of pro or anti-life sort of ways of looking at things, depending on the state of consciousness of the individual. And so what seems to me is that as we keep moving upwards in consciousness, as we're getting more direct, we are going to have exponentially larger shifts in a positive direction that's going to correlate with these changes that do happen in the cosmos.
Without any question of doubt. Yes, that's that's a mathematical certainty and a mathematical formula. I couldn't agree more.
It's exciting, Sasha. It's exciting times to see I'm really feel fortunate to be alive and a part of this, and even being aware enough to just have conversations around this. And again, remaining open to stuff. It's like, I feel like as soon as we start to feel like we close down around new information, that's a sign for us to just sort of step back and see if we can observe it a little bit and ask questions even more, to ourselves. So I really appreciate your candor and your authenticity in the way that you describe the information that you describe.
Thank you, Jason. It's very kind. I hope that humans, before we can tap into the limitless and ineffable nature of our own biotechnology, which is the greatest accomplishment of the Godhead, is almost certainly the actualized human being. Because in the first instance, we are an assembly of id. We are a confluence of all of the cosmological strains of DNA that exist in the universe. They all find their way toward this extraordinary planet, Tara, Gaia, which is the little pearl in the abyss, in the void. For a reason, we represent the quintessence of the Christed light in the abyss. I don't know why these buggers on their motorcycles. It's like midnight at night, but no, they've decided to drag racing.
Okay. Yeah, Sasha's in Bali right at
the middle of the jungle. I don't mind telling you, with a little pathway there, whatever. Anyway, the point is, before we tap into that Christed nature, we're going to have to systematically disentangle governments and systems, structures, money, fiat, currency, all the institutions that control our lives, every single one of them, hospitals, schools, universities should become museums, nothing else. We don't need to be educated. We need to remember our ineffable, immanent, immortal nature and start to tell stories, the ones we've lived through. Can you imagine? A true learning is to go into the holonomic field and remember walking amongst dinosaurs or living in the medieval era and what you went through in that incarnation. Well, we can plasma project back and take biopsies of the past and the future in these so-called timelines. We have that privilege once we become actualized. Ask any realized sadhu. And the fact is that we should be speaking about those stories and remembering to each other our intersections and when we were last together, because every human being, almost certainly, that you encounter in this world that's not just part of the extras in the scene, but somebody that you bump into in the street or sit down next to on a bus or have any kind of engagement with, almost certainly you've had an engagement with that individual in other lifetimes. And that's why you're intersecting. That's always connected to that. In the same way that if you study your body and you see that you've got little black moles, little brown moles all over the body, the bigger the mole, the more pronounced the mole is, those are the kind of intersect points of where you died in previous incarnations. If you've got a great big mole here, it's normally because a spear or a bullet went in there. So they all tell stories as well, connected to the cellular memory. And, once you've remembered, actually, you can then disengage, and actually they can flush out of the body. But the point is, we've got so many majestic and amazing stories that we need to remember and to begin to tell to one another. We should not be going in to schools, colleges, and universities for cult programming. We need to just dispense with that. We need to dispense with governments and governance altogether. Humans only need one thing, and that is auto-determination. You make your own determinations. We can create micro-currencies, we can create micro-communities and micro-nations. We can live as we choose, as pixies and elves, or as desert dwellers, or as whatever. We can, with there's any number of fantasy that we're allowed to explore in our creativity in this world. We want to swing from trees in great big beautiful basket-like homes. Do we want to live underwater? Do we want to go and terraform other planets? Do we want to, there's limitless things that we could do and be once we've unshackled and unfettered ourselves from time and motion, time, money, and fear, and the indentureship to false light. The only false light that you need to be aware of here is the one that sells you the idea that you are limited or have any limitation whatsoever.
Yeah. And for people that are wondering, like, how do you learn stuff when you don't go to school or whatever? It's like, this is part of what is exciting about what we are moving into. I mean, and this is why I think it's important to play with what are quote unquote extraordinary abilities, or some of even our paranormal abilities that are really not so abnormal, but they've just been sort of, I think, suppressed and repressed. But things like telepathy, things like remote viewing, what you're talking about in some ways, this is like connecting into your Akashic records. And this is, or from a quantum perspective, it would be the unified field, or this sort of idea where it's like all information is available, but we just have to access it. And if we access it, we are privy to, like you said, lifetimes and lifetimes of information, of experiential information, right? So part of this is where our concepts, I think, there is a massive dismantling of everything that's going on right now. That's why people feel like the world that we know it is crumbling. But we will use the analogy a lot of times, it's like a seed. You plant a seed, and if you just focus on the seed as it breaks and starts to fall apart, you think that your entire world as you know it is going to shit and everything's done. But out of that sprouts this new life in something that you couldn't even comprehend by just looking at the seed.
Well, let's just look at what you start off by saying, talking about education, about people have a hard time, many people have a hard time understanding, and how can you not educate? Well, I'll walk people through that, and I'm not patronizing, because I had to walk myself through it. And again, I'm a kind of loose bohemian, so I'm lucky enough to have spent decades kind of languishing. I work like a dog, nine days a week, but I'm able to dwell on these things because I've never worked a day in my life in terms of being a wage slave. So I'm lucky that I've been able to explore these things. And so I'll pass on what I've learned. Look, do you think that those kids who can play Tchaikovsky at the age of 5, and there are millions of them who can play musical instruments at the age of 5, 6, 7, okay? Do you think they learned that at school? The answer is no, they didn't. They never went to school yet. Do you think those kids who can speak 3 languages because their mum's, Bulgarian, their father is Russian, and, their grandmother, knows how to speak Greek. So do you think that they speak 3 languages at the age of 6 because they went to school? The answer is no, they didn't. They did it by being at home and by telling stories and by being in an environment that was conducive to learning. The only reason why you go to school is to learn Kabbalah, to learn how to count, to learn how to do spells, and to live by spells, spellbinding, contracts, lies, deceptions, and numbers, codes, okay? Which is the tabulating of our lives, the unitizing and securitizing of our lives into false units of value. So you don't need to learn how to count. I still can't count. I've been around a very long time in this world. I can't count for shit. I don't want to count, don't need to count. I only need to count as many apples as I can eat in the afternoon. And I really don't care beyond that. I don't know what money I've got or don't have. I don't do contracts. I despise them. I have people that do that, but I'm useless at all of that stuff. I don't want to get involved in anything like that. But the point I'm making is that you don't need to count in this world. You know, I'm very good at very advanced mathematics, curiously enough, and I didn't learn it at school. I learned it myself when I entered the fractal, weird space I went to in the late 1990s, and I had to make sense of it or go mad. So I frantically started learning Mandelbrot mathematics because of that. And that's helped me understand other equations in life. But that was because I wanted to learn what happened to me in that vision quest. I needed to understand it. And the only thing that made any sense was fractality and the mathematics, which was MSET math. So I become very, very adept at that. And I've got not a mathematical mind. I'm not very good at languages. I can get by in Dutch, and I can get by in German, and I can get by in French, and I can get by in Bahasa Indonesia, and I'm pretty good at English. But the point is, if I'd not gone to school, I guarantee I would have spoken 5 languages by now, fluently, because I would have simply purposed my mind and tooled my mind toward things that excited me, that interested me. So that's the Krishnamurti school, or the Steiner kind of Montessori approach to education, is sit upon the grass, preferably beneath a tree, and tell stories, for God's sake, and listen to one another. Listen to kids. They're that much closer to source when they're born than we are. And we insist on cult programming them, foot binding them, and dream spelling them. So really, it's just about a complete wholesale disavowal of all that went before, in the knowledge that anything that was real and authentic and righteous and judicious will remain with us, and we can move forward with that. But we don't need big buildings and institutions to govern us. We don't need banks to control our money. We don't need hospitals to ensure that they're death factories in any event. We don't need or want doctors of the allopathic type who are simply going to prescribe poisons to us as functionaries of a quadrillion-dollar pharmaceutical crime cartel. We don't want lawyers, thank you very much, coming in and lying for coin, because that's all that lawyers do. They lie. And we don't want to be subjected as plantation slaves to governments and tax authorities, any authorities, customs and excise and immigration. Fuck off, all of you, not interested, thank you very much. There is no gun running or drug running or human trafficking or pedophilia or ritual Satanism when we're actually able to police ourselves in our homes, our villages, our communities. We flush that shit out rather quickly. It's the pyramidal systems of stealth, dominion, and control and manipulation that allow for that draconian serpentine stuff to creep into our beautiful lives. So get rid of it all. Cities, we don't want or need them. And I honestly say that until we get this, that it's our choice. Get back to the land. Remember communion with the sacred soil. Leave the cities, leave the citadel, leave Babylon, leave Babel. Go back to the rivers, go back to the forest, to the mountains, to the ocean, to the fields, to the savannah, to the plains. Go back, reconnect with the fractality of nature, with the sacred soil, and with the running water. Go back and remember. Now, once we start that exodus, and it's going to start, Jason, after the second COVID bullshit lockdown exercise, we're going to see another exponential spike in people going, that's it, I'm done, I'm out, I'm taking my babies, my family, I'm selling up shop in Manhattan or in Berlin or in Lorenzo Marx, I'm going back to the soil. That's going to happen naturally. The part of the hubris of our fall of Babylon right now is going to see a huge exodus of living men and women of the living soil, sons and daughters of God, returning to the cradle of nature.
Yeah, it's well, and like you said, it's already happening. I know when everything first started, we were living right in Toronto at a practice in Toronto or outside of Toronto, and basically we sold everything. We hopped in we pulled up a 26-foot U-Haul and drove across Canada to Vancouver Island in May. So right around the first craziness. And we live on Vancouver Island now. We live moments down from the water. We take our kids down to the beach. They spend the day hanging out in the forest and spending time. Like, it seems so simple for people, but it's like you receive information when you are in nature too. Like it's not just that, you know, if you really slow down and actually go into nature, you will feel different. And I feel like it's an essential part to reconnecting with what your real truth is. You have to get back to aspects of natural law again, and spending time in nature is paramount. And even if you can't, you know, live on Vancouver Island and be down by the water in the forest, it's like bring nature into your home, incorporate even plant remedies, do different things that assist you. You know, or even like plant elixirs. All these different things are aspects of bringing in plant and nature information, because it allows you to align back to, I think, part of the true self. So I know for us, that was a really important part, was disconnecting from all kinds of mainstream. And we haven't had a TV for like a decade, but it's like just disconnect from the other stuff, slow things down, spend more time in nature when you can, and just then ask yourself the same questions and see if they come up and they feel different to you. When you know, they will feel different depending on what you are spending your time doing. So Sasha, I really appreciate your time with us today. Where can we send people to learn more about the work that you're doing? And you've got a lot of different things on the go. You are a busy guy, I know, and I appreciate the work you're putting out in the world, but where can we send people?
Thank you. I think at this stage, I'm changing my tune because I'm being deplatformed off social media. This last week, I've been taken down largely from YouTube and Facebook. So if anyone wants to be in touch with me, I was going to say Parler, but Parler was taken down this afternoon, so don't bother there. The best thing to do is I'm putting out a weekly report now, and all my media, because I do a lot of media, and I put a weekly report out. If people go to oh my lord, oh sorry, sashastone.com. There you go, I forgot my own name. So www.sashastone.com is SACHA stone.com, and that is subscribe there, and then every week you'll get a ping with my prognostications on the state of the world and thumbnails to media. And that's the best way to stay in touch with me. And from there, you can also springboard to the ITNJ, the International Tribunal for Natural Justice. Again, we're doing multiple commissions which are open right now. And also the New Earth Project, New Earth Nation, New Earth Project. We're launching some very exciting stuff there in March, April, which is going to be very exciting. And there's other stuff that we're doing this year, not connected, but to do with the world hereditary leaders. I'm working with a number of them around the world, and we're looking to announce and launch the World Hereditary Council and World Hereditary Assembly in the middle of this year. Really exciting play, because that's, if we talk about where government goes when it moves into its dissolution that we're seeing right now, when the people withdraw their attention from the idol, the false light that is government, where does the attention go to? Well, there has to be a movement back to the hereditary leadership to some extent. All of those paramount chiefs and leaders and elders and flame keepers and royal dynasties of the First Nation peoples that were thwarted and massacred and overthrown and lied to through deceptive treaties by the Vatican Anglo-American Corporation. All of that stuff will have to default to hereditary leadership to some extent before we move back again into a more egalitarian universalist form of human society. So I'm just getting prepared for the regenesis of the hereditary leaders and elders of all nations of the world. I've been working at it for 21 years, and it's all really coming together right now. Super excited. That's my main focus this year and next year.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. We'll have to touch base around that. I'd love to hear more about that when you've had those meetings. I'll make sure that I have all of the information, the show notes, and also I can't remember the exact date. We'll be posting it up shortly here too. But Sasha's going to join us for a live question and answer at some point here as well. So we've got that date set somewhere. So
Love to do that. Very happy. Yeah, very good.
I think I think Taya's already set that up. So we'll let you know exactly the date on that. Usually we do it within the week of the episode. So after this, if anybody has questions, then start to pose them as we'll start to accumulate them, and then we'll pass them along to Sasha to help to answer for us during the live that we set that up. Okay.
Well, don't send them to me. I'll
no,
just
send them. Just post them on this YouTube video, and we'll keep them all sort of organized, and then we'll go through those with Sasha during the live.
Great. Well, send me the link of this when it's done, so I can also chime it out on our networks.
We'll get you everything. So, Sasha, thank you so much for your time. Been an absolute pleasure.
God bless you, brother. Bye-bye.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.